The Supreme Court just sent shockwaves through federal law enforcement with their unanimous 9-0 decision on wrong house raids. But what you haven't heard yet is how this ruling will actually change enforcement tactics moving forward and what it means when federal agents show up at your door. The next 12 months will determine whether this decision becomes a real shield for gun owners or just another legal footnote. Hit subscribe because this affects every firearms owner in America. The legal framework that protects federal agents. The Federal Tort Claims Act, passed in 1946, allowed citizens to sue the government, but came loaded with exceptions that federal agencies have exploited for 78 years. These exceptions were designed to protect legitimate government functions, but they've morphed into blanket shields, protecting incompetence and recklessness. The Qualified Immunity Doctrine works alongside this act to create a two-layer protection system, making it incredibly difficult to hold individual agents accountable. Federal agents operate under different legal standards than local police when it comes to accountability. State officers can be sued under Section 1983 civil rights laws with fewer immunity protections, but federal agents have successfully argued they deserve broader immunity because they're enforcing federal laws. This double standard created a system where the more powerful the government agency, the less accountable its agents are to the people they serve. The Supreme Court's decision doesn't eliminate these protections entirely, but creates the first significant crack in this immunity wall in over a generation. By ruling that federal agencies can't stack immunity exceptions to avoid all accountability, the court forced lower courts to examine whether agents followed proper procedures. What federal agencies are doing right now to adapt. Within 48 hours of the Supreme Court's decision, every major federal law enforcement agency issued internal guidance documents instructing agents on adjusting operational procedures. The FBI, ATF, DEA, and U.S. Marshals Service held emergency briefings with legal teams to assess potential liability exposure from past raids that might now be challenged. These agencies know hundreds of dismissed cases could potentially be reopened if victims can show immunity, exceptions were improperly applied. The Department of Justice quietly assembled a task force focused on reviewing raid procedures and use of force protocols to minimize liability under this new legal framework. According to sources within federal law enforcement who spoke on condition of anonymity, the primary concern isn't just future raids, but the avalanche of past cases that might be revived. Agencies are particularly worried about cases involving gun owners where excessive force was used or wrong addresses were targeted. Federal agencies are also lobbying Congress to pass legislation restoring broader immunity protections or creating new exceptions to the Federal Tort Claims Act. Behind closed doors, agency directors argue this Supreme Court decision will have a chilling effect on law enforcement operations. But what they're really worried about is accountability for systemic problems that have plagued federal raids for years, including inadequate training and poor intelligence verification. How this decision changes wrong address raid liability. Before this Supreme Court ruling, approximately 92% of wrong address raid lawsuits against federal agencies were dismissed at earliest stages based on immunity claims. Victims never got to present evidence about what actually happened or whether agents followed proper procedures. The Martin decision fundamentally changes this by requiring courts to examine whether agents acted reasonably and followed established protocols before granting immunity. The practical impact means federal agencies will now face discovery in many more cases, forcing them to produce internal documents, training materials, briefing notes, and communications showing how decisions were made. This discovery process often reveals systemic problems agencies desperately want hidden, such as inadequate address verification procedures, pressure to meet raid quotas, and patterns of constitutional violations. When these documents become public, they create evidence for future cases and put political pressure on agencies to reform. For gun owners specifically, this decision creates new opportunities to challenge confiscations during wrong address raids where firearms are seized and held even after agents realize their mistake. Previously, agencies argued they had discretionary authority to hold weapons during investigations and couldn't be sued for seizures. Under the Supreme Court's narrower interpretation, victims can now potentially sue for property return and compensation for deprivation of their Second Amendment rights during wrongful seizures. The decision also opens doors for emergency injunctive relief in ongoing cases where federal agents seized firearms from the wrong person or address. State-level reforms. Accelerating after this ruling. At least 14 states have introduced or are preparing legislation creating additional state-level accountability for federal agents operating within their borders. These bills would require federal agencies to notify state authorities before executing raids, subject federal agents to state oversight for use of force incidents, and create state causes of action, allowing citizens to sue in state courts. This state-level rebellion against federal immunity is unprecedented in modern times and represents a fundamental federalism shift. Texas has taken the most aggressive approach by introducing legislation that would make it a state crime for federal agents to execute raids without proper verification procedures and state notification. The bill specifically requires agents to present evidence to a state magistrate that they've verified the target address through at least 2 independent sources before executing warrants. While this legislation faces constitutional challenges about federal supremacy, it demonstrates how states are responding to years of federal overreach. Several states are creating special compensation funds for victims of wrong address raids, providing immediate financial assistance while federal lawsuits work through courts. These funds recognize that even when victims eventually win federal cases, litigation takes years and costs enormous amounts in legal fees. By providing immediate state compensation, these programs help victims rebuild their lives while creating a public record of federal misconduct. Practical steps. Gun owners must take right now. Every gun owner in America needs to document their firearms collection with detailed photographs, serial numbers, and purchase records stored in multiple secure locations, including cloud storage and physical copies kept off premises. If federal agents execute a wrong address raid at your home, this documentation becomes critical evidence for proving what was taken and seeking its return. Without proper documentation, agencies can claim they returned everything. Installing exterior security cameras with cloud backup is no longer optional for gun owners wanting to protect themselves from wrong address raids and excessive force claims. Multiple federal cases have been won or lost based on video evidence that either confirmed or contradicted official reports about how raids were conducted. Make sure cameras capture all entry points, are motion activated, and upload footage to secure cloud storage that can't be seized. Establishing a relationship with an attorney specializing in federal civil rights litigation before you need one can save critical time if you're targeted in a wrong address raid. These attorneys can immediately file emergency motions for return of property, preservation of evidence, and preliminary injunctions preventing ongoing violations of your rights. This Supreme Court ruling is just the beginning of a transformation in how federal agencies will be forced to treat gun owners and all Americans. Subscribe right now and hit that notification bell so you're informed as this case develops and new challenges emerge. Drop a comment sharing whether you think this decision will actually change federal behavior or if agencies will find new ways around accountability. Share this with every gun owner you know because knowledge is power.